it's not only the election-related technology that we need to look after, it's also what happens in the country during elections, before elections, during elections, and after elections. When we talk about the cybersecurity issues of elections, we should actually talk about the cybersecurity of the government or the overall ecosystem where elections lie in during elections.
Welcome to the Digital Government Podcast. Tune in to discover the future of governance and ways of getting there.
Hello, my name is Merle Maigre. October is the Cybersecurity Month, and we are here today to discuss about securing the vote, building trust in election results. It is a foremost pleasure to have two good friends and colleagues here, Priit Vinkel, Senior Expert at Digital Governance in eGovernance Academy and former Head of State Electoral Office, and Tonu Tammer, former Head of the Estonian CERT and Associated Expert of the eGovernance Academy, who shares plenty of Estonian best practice throughout various eGovernance Academy projects. So we are here today to discuss about elections, which really touches a core moment of citizens' life in democratic society. Also, 2024 is the biggest election year in human history because half of the world's population, some 3.7 million people, will have or have had the opportunity to go to election polls throughout this year in 72 countries throughout. Ever since January, we have had and we have seen elections across the world since starting from Taiwan's general elections up all the way to, for example, US elections coming up in November. So voting really during elections is at the very heart of democracy. Perhaps, Priit, you could take us off by scoping the issue and telling us how would you scope the problem of securing elections in the digital era? What are the main threats as seen through the election organizers' point of view?
Yes, absolutely. I think the main issue that we're seeing currently is that not so lots of people see elections as a technology issue, that elections for the layman, so to say, is all on paper. But when we look at most of the elections in the world, there's always at least some kind of technological aspect in elections. And the scope of elections is also much wider than it's usually understood. Election, let's say, the process of election starts already with the campaign. It starts already with the registration of candidates, registration and putting together the lists of voters. All these pre-election, let's say, organizational features, which then is followed by the election itself or the voting itself, where in a lot of countries all across the world, technology, at least in some feature or way, is used. And then post this voting day, or this usually it's a voting Sunday, it can also be any other day, post this actual voting, there's the tabulation, the tallying of votes, which usually all across the world is done, at least in some regards, digitally. So here you already see that despite the actual voting happening on paper with paper ballots, it's actually very, very widely technological process, disregarding of the understanding of the people.
Right, and at the end of the day, it's also about communicating the voting results, which we have seen can be interfered, not in cyber security means per se, but through disinformation and other hybrid attacks.
Yeah, absolutely. Disinformation and false information, fake, let's say, videos or these AI-enhanced procedures. This is all already not the future. It's already today's reality. And what we also see is that this results management or let's say putting out the results after the fact of voting is also a trust-building issue, that if something goes wrong there, it's so easy to call the elections somehow tampered with or problematic. So in every way throughout the let's say the election procedures, the trust issue should also not be overlooked.
Turning to you, Tonu, we discussed by laying out and sort of dissecting the different phases in elections about the role of technology, as if technology only introduces threats through vulnerabilities. Tonu, I'd like to provoke you a little bit and ask you, what is the role of technology in elections, and are there ways that technology can be introduced to actually minimize risks during elections, not just present a source of threat?
I believe when we look at how technology is used and how Priit very well described those aspects, we need to recognize that technology in that sense can be used to carry out the elections. And in many ways it is used to the slightest possible way of, only doing the communication through media and then publishing the results all the way down to how we do it in Estonia. Being 100% digital, okay, there is still the paper part that is left, but if the voter doesn't want to use, everything else is 100% digital. So we have a wide variety of possibilities that, different countries fall into different places. Now, where Priit discussed about the usage of technology, I would like to emphasize that technology in that sense can be used to attack technology. But as Priit was mentioning, it can also be used to attack a human mind, which in that case, I wouldn't even call it the cybersecurity issue. It's more of a, broader sort of technical issue. So all of those deep fakes and false news, etc., they aren't particularly targeting one or another technical system, but they are simply putting out the misinformation for the ordinary citizen or a voter to actually change their mind or form an opinion. When we look at those aspects, how do we use technology to protect the human being? That is probably one of the biggest challenges, because there is no sort of software update I can do on myself, so to be far more resilient. Whereas when we look at the technical side, where an IT system is used for a function within the election process, that IT system can first of all be audited. It produces heaps of logs on different aspects on how the data is going through the system, how different individuals interact with the system, so that it is far more likely to understand if a tampering has taken place. And if we use those technologies and we recognize the benefits they can bring, we actually have an opportunity to elevate the trust in the election. Now, that still leaves the people who do not inherently understand how technology works and can, whenever there is, I don't get the result I wanted, slam the technology used, because most people tend not to understand what happens inside the magical black box of a computer.
Indeed, and that leads me to a question of the necessity to observe elections and the possibilities to actually observe elections from the cybersecurity point of view. Priit, did you want to open that front, or did you want to add something?
I wanted to also add to the trust issue that it's not only the election-related technology that we need to look after, it's also what happens in the country during elections, before elections, during elections, and after elections. For example, if there's a DDoS attack or some kind of a, let's say, quite harmless attack on any other government sites or domains, this could also, let's say, attack in itself the integrity of elections or the trustworthiness of elections. So it's also really important to understand that when we talk about the cybersecurity issues of elections, we should actually talk about the cybersecurity of the government, or the let's say the overall ecosystem where elections lie in during elections.
Very right, and ecosystem is a word I'd underline, because beyond the government, an attack could also be directed against media. For example, that is very closely linked to the undermining of trust, for example, when you talk about the communication of the election results. Also, what you say, Priit, reminds me of the necessity to introduce new technology, particularly when it's linked to the elections, very prudently and in a timely manner, not leaving a short time period between the introduction of new technology and the elections itself. Whereas, would you like to comment that from your experience?
Well, if we focus on technology, attacking technology, as Priit was saying, at DDoS, for example, there are great tools and techniques out there that will help to protect against those attacks. Now, what I have seen, luckily more and more, is that those technologies are being used to, for example, for the same reason as Priit was outlining, to already build the resilience against different risks. Now, we don't know if in the next election this attack will come, but we've seen many times that they do take place. So it makes sense to put the effort and invest a little bit of resource to minimize those risks. Equally, we have seen voting systems being targeted. Again, putting the effort in securing those systems, using the technology that is out there, that is designed to secure systems. Not to interfere in the functioning of the system, but to prevent technical harms from viruses, from unauthorized loggings, etc., multi-factor authentications, you name it. Those tools are there not only in our everyday life, but it's absolutely necessary that we use those same tools in securing the systems that are used to carry out the elections.
Yeah, I just wanted to add what also Tonu said about the special nature of elections, that as we talk about elections, the election organizers have a really particularly set date where they have to perform, which is different to any other ICT solution that there is out there that can postpone the let's say launch, for example, or can let's say perform their duties later. Elections can't be later. So if something happens too late, as you mentioned, Merle, really that if you are too late in rolling out, for example, some new technology in elections, and you don't have enough time to test out, to verify, to have penetration testing and all these needed, let's say, certainty that it's actually working, you run into a huge risk during elections that you run into problems, and this undermines actually the trustworthiness of elections at this time.
Now, Priit, I understand you are talking about the Estonian way of looking at things. I assume there are many countries in the world where not being on the same level is assured by nature.
Sure. What do you do then? Or can you outline some practical examples? For example, if you Priit, say that there should be a sort of like deadline or a certain date before the elections when no new technology should be introduced. What's that time?
That's really difficult to say, but let's say the rule of thumb should be that there should be ample time for the organizers to be prepared. Is it a month before the election day? Is it 2 months before election day? It depends on the technology, but there should be some cutoff date which allows, or freezing date, so to say, that nothing changes after that, which allows for actually proper preparation before the elections. And the proper preparation is not only on the, let's say, central or core level, but also the user level. And here we come to the topic of capacity and the capacity building, where also EGA is really looking into a lot in its projects, where we enhance the capacity of the users and the awareness of these risks that can be. So I think it's really important to keep this, let's say, this cool off before the actual election when the elections are actually held.
But you're not only talking about the end users in this context, you're also talking about people working in the voting stations, people who are organizing elections, who are working behind the scenes to operate different IT systems and support lines. So all of those people, we need to understand who they are, what is their role with regards to elections and technology, and what they need to do in order for them to perform, the system to perform, and ultimately the elections to be carried out in a timely and correct manner.
When you mentioned about the usual sort of list of things that one should consider when introducing new technology, making sure that it's cyber secure, I suspect that this list is no unique to any other gadget being introduced to the market. But for the listeners of ours and those perhaps who are more intimately involved with some upcoming elections, can you point to some useful sources where they could get this checklist of things that should be done vis-a-vis sort of like cybersecurity aspects to be considered when introducing new types of technology in elections? Are there some particularly good selections of sort of best practices besides the various publications that the EGA has done?
Yeah, absolutely. Internationally, on the international scene, there's a lots of cooperative materials. For example, the Council of Europe, the OSCE, the UN, different organizations are dealing with the topics. But to just bring out one of the best, accessible sources of information that that people could use who have interest in the topic would be the newly published handbook for the observation of information and communication technologies in elections. It's a publication by OSCE ODIHR, the democracy-oriented branch of OSCE, and this handbook was published early this year, 2024. So it's a fairly new look at how actually technology could be observed and what kind of underlying principles should be, foreseen in any kind of technology that is used in elections. So this would be one recommendation.
Very useful. Thanks for that. And I understand that when our teams are performing these election cybersecurity reports, like the election cybersecurity of Montenegro that the EGA team with you, Priit, in the forefront published a year ago in September 23, and an upcoming cybersecurity elections report that we are putting together about North Macedonia. This OSCE handbook is something that forms a sort of like a baseline in our assessments.
Absolutely. This informs us of the topics and the important, questions we should ask, or what every election organizer should actually ask when they are introducing technology in their elections. And so this is a very good, as you say, a baseline for not only election organizers, but every interested, listener and every interested reader who wants to learn about this topic.
Very well. Well, I'd like to kind of change gears or slightly change from or move on from the technology, from discussing pure technology to more sort of cooperation and interagency and intergovernmental cooperation aspects of the elections. From your views, it's clear that safeguarding the elections, making sure that the elections are trusted, is not the single responsibility of one entity. Could you perhaps share your thoughts on the idea of how can government agencies better work together to address election interference?
Well, if I bring in the Estonian example, then of course the main responsibility lies in the Central Election Commission, who is entitled to be the body who makes sure that the elections are carried out in a fair and transparent way. But let's not forget about other agencies that are also there to do their job. And may I remind to the listeners that although there are other agencies, their mandate isn't anything related to elections, but for example, police, general order and making sure that no laws are breached, for example. Then we have the authority of internal security services, who are particularly keen in watching for any actors who are state-sponsored actors. In case of elections, for example, that their hand is not covertly trying to interfere, or if there are any signs, they will do their course of duty because that is what the people and the legislators so expect. Then we have different cybersecurity related authorities, for example, CERTs, who are out there to try and understand different cyber related risks, whether there are, from miscommunication campaigns a little bit to more on, whether certain DDoSes happen, certain activities are carried out, in particular towards the government or towards the election systems themselves. So all of these authorities will need to work together for a sort of, positive, safe and trustworthy outcome. And they are not competing, not within the country, but definitely outside the country for their roles, because they are independent, but all working towards the same goal and all working towards or for the same people and then for the same country, but each doing their respective part.
Maybe just to add here some of the threats that we're actually seeing all over the world when we're looking at the let's say election organizations, is that in quite many cases the election organization is oriented towards paper based elections, or let's say the procedures. So the capacity and the availability to actually manage technology is different in different organizations, which actually brings a huge risk when introducing technology, and this is vendor dependency, that the election organizer trusts fully the vendor, giving away all of the, let's say, responsibility for the results to the vendor, which is hugely alarming to any, let's say, rule and risk awareness that there can be. So this is one possibility or one problem that should be looked at carefully when introducing technology. And the other thing is that the election organizations are, let's say, they tend to be really independent all over the world. They want to keep every let's say possible procedure they are doing really independent and separate from the organization around them, the government around them. But what this actually brings is also quite a lot of problems with transparency, that they don't let lots of observers or outside views into the procedures. And with technology, you don't have any other possibility to have transparency, to allow access to the technology used and the systems used. So these are some of the threats that really should be looked at all over the world.
The last point that you mentioned, I think this is particularly true also when it comes to cooperation. Many times I have seen that the election authority actually is not too keen in working with partners within the country to try and bring their assistance, not to carry out the election, but to understand sort of broader risks and then advices on how to mitigate those risks. Not to say that you should do something or you must do something, but please consider that we see those risks. Take those into account when you do your whatever risk assessments and you plan for the different courses of action. So in this regard, I think it's crucial that trust is built from the onset, and it should start not sort of 2 months or a month before elections, but it should start at least a year before, starting slowly or gearing up slowly, so that as the time progresses, people already have the right contacts. They know what sort of assistance they can expect, or what the election authority is willing to accept. And having those discussions beforehand actually helps in regards to preparations.
So in an attempt to wrapping this part, we would encourage the various state election commissions work closely, come together with relevant CERTs, be it national or governmental computer emergency response teams, to discuss in an open manner what is needed, what could be offered, and where, if countries looking out for assistance from international donors, where can donors help, and where does the country manage itself. Another step I've seen from personal experiences is to form these temporary election task forces between different government entities, because it's clear that you don't need to be alert all 4 or 5 years in a row, but you need to kind of pool your resources together at times of elections and a fair amount before that, few months, like a quarter before that. So putting together election task forces with relevant actors and stakeholders from a given country that can pool their resources and build trust well in advance in elections definitely would serve off. I see you both nodding. Moving on to perhaps discuss one last point that I think is relevant in this context is the aspect that political elections, as we all know, are a deeply national issue. How much room is there for cooperation and multinational efforts?
That's a good question, and we already kind of tackled this also with the cooperation inside of the country issue, that cooperation is needed, and that there are organizations for election management bodies which actually cooperate all over the world. But usually that's true, that the politically highly sensitive nature of elections usually, let's say, makes elections a bit special of a service that the government offers. And so the cooperation is always more on the technical side. And every country, every, let's say, election is a bit different all over the world. So But what's not different are the principles of transparency, the principles of trustworthiness that needs to be built. So I think the cooperation can be held based on these principles for sure.
If I can add that working with international partners, I think, is also a must, especially when we look at the aspect of technology, protecting technology. DDoS protection solutions. I have yet to see a small country producing such technologies themselves. It is rather big tech solutions that would need to be employed, possibly cloud solutions. Same is for making sure that systems which are at the voting stations are up to date, are secure. We can think about some names for big tech of operating systems that are used. So of course it makes sense to work with those partners to understand what their capabilities and capacities are in regards to elections. Quite a few of them offer, I wouldn't say a freebie, but they do operate these programs which aim to support elections. Not always charging money, so it can be on a pro bono basis, where big tech actually carries their social responsibility. So I think it makes sense to understand the possibilities. Now, again, as Priit was mentioning, every country needs to make up their own mind to what degree they are willing to leverage on that, but they do need to understand where their dependencies lie and where and how these risks can be mitigated, and sometimes using the external partners.
Very well. You both have plenty of experience of elections and election cybersecurity in Estonia. What do you think are some of the best practices that Estonia can share with its partners in this regards?
Yeah, I think what you already mentioned, the network model of tackling let's say technical issues is really something that Estonia has done for years, that especially during elections, this task force model of putting together the necessary let's say specialities all over the country as these organizations, these let's say capacities or in different organizations are put together and then working in concert to actually have a trustworthy and great elections. And also what I would really bring out, especially in the couple last years, that the societal ability or the society's desire to speak about elections has become much more active, and that's really a positive thing that this enhances actually transparency. One good example is the Academy of Sciences, which has the Cybersecurity Committee, which is working for the second year on risk analysis of elections.
That's here in Estonia.
Yes, here in Estonia, which are not only, let's say, technology, for example, like internet voting as we use here in Estonia, but also paper voting risks, which also has a lot, again, coming back to the start, that paper voting has also lots of technology in it, around it, so to say. So I think this societal cooperation, this communication that the election organizer has to have with the society at large, not only the politicians but also the voters, it's also really, really important.
I would like to summarize focusing on three areas. So first of all is the cooperation within the country. As I was explaining before, on using and leveraging on the knowledge and expertise of different agencies. Of course, the election committee is responsible, but if you are ignoring the competences that others have, you are jeopardizing your own work in far more ways than is strictly necessary. Secondly, working with international partners to understand how technology can be used to protect technology and how technology can be used to protect voters. For example, social media platforms have special programs to tackle false information campaigns, and if we work with those platforms well in advance, we can pull the plug on those campaigns far more faster than otherwise possible. And last but not least, to use the latest technologies which are out there to protect systems. So, for example, cloud technologies, different AI tools to understand whether an AI was used to carry out some content modification or something like that. Otherwise, we emphasize that we are, allowing the adversary to use those advanced tools without having the tools to counter them. And that is the three areas where I believe we must work strongly.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. The EGA continues work in this regards of cybersecurity towards elections and securing the democratic processes as it does in other areas of cybersecurity and digital aspects of our life. Tonu, Priit, thank you very much for today's discussion on securing the vote, building trust in election results. You have been listening to the Digital Government Podcast. Stay safe online and offline. Have a good October. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by the eGovernance Academy. Tune in next time.